Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for Pivoting End-of-Life Care in the Time of COVID with Rabbi Joseph Krakoff, Senior Director of Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network. On your screen right now, you can see a list of our upcoming programs. We have quite a variety and more to come. And if you wish to register, please visit mishjewishhistory.org/calendar. Additionally, thank you for your continued support of our Zoom programming. And if you wish to donate to JHSM, please visit mishjewishhistory.org/donate. We'll be taking questions at the end of Rabbi Krakoff's program this evening. And if you have any questions for him, please be sure to submit them via the chat feature so that I can moderate that discussion when he is done with his presentation. This evening, we are very, very blessed to have with us Rabbi Joseph Krakoff, who, as I said before, is the Senior Director of Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network. He joined JHCN following a 16-year career as a congregational rabbi, and he is very passionate about his experience in the end-of-life caregiving area. We are very lucky to have him with us this evening to discuss the changes and triumphs in the past year of COVID and what that has meant for end-of-life care. Please give a warm welcome to Rabbi Krakoff.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's wonderful to be together tonight. It's wonderful to be with you and to be able to share some reflections on what this last year has been like, which I know has been for all of us a very challenging, very, very difficult time. I want to begin really with some background in what is end-of-life care. And for that, I'm going to just share some slides with you that you can really get a sort of a sense of where does this idea of end-of-life care come from in the Torah. So one of the things that I like to draw people's attention to is that the first death that we hear about that comes about because of illness is the death of Jacob. And we see that as Jacob from the book Genesis, chapter 48, verse 1. As Jacob nears the end of his life, his son Joseph is informed of his father's illness, prompting him to come to his side immediately. In fact, the Hebrew is Hine Avicha Chole. He's told, behold, your father is sick. And whenever the word in the Torah, Hine, is used, it seems to bring about this sense of a seriousness, something that he needs to quickly get back because we don't know how long Jacob is going to live. The word Hine connotes surprise. It connotes something unexpected or unusual, which we may kind of look at and say, wait a minute, Jacob was actually 147 years old at the time of his illness. So it should have been to Joseph and the other sons anything but surprising. But according to the Midrash, according to stories that are told sort of between the lines of the Torah, Joseph actually is caught off guard because Jacob, in fact, as I alluded to already, was the first sick person in human history. Just a few more texts that I find interesting, and then we'll get into the actual core of end-of-life care. The Midrash goes on to say that actually Jacob demanded sickness in the world, that before Jacob asked God for illness to be in the world, there really was no illness. People just died. So Jacob prayed before the Holy One, Master of the universe, if a person should die without illness, he would not be able to resolve his affairs among his children. It was only if he became sick for 2 or 3 days, he would have time to arrange his affairs. So God said to Jacob, by your life, by your request, you have demanded a good thing, and from you it will begin. And so from that point forward to the present day, we see that Jacob used his own illness toward end of life to be able to put his affairs in order, to bless his children and grandchildren, as you may remember from the very, very end of the book of Genesis, where Jacob, the deathbed scene, where Jacob gathers his children around him and his grandchildren and conveys to them an ethical and spiritual will that guides us to this day. So with that introduction, I want to talk a little bit about what we do at Jewish Hospice and what we really needed to do when the pandemic came upon us. And I encourage, as we go along, to please put questions in your chat. So at the end of this session, I can speak to all of the questions that you put forth. Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network, very briefly, was founded by Rabbi Bunny Friedman in the year 2000. And the idea behind that was to be able to take care of Jews at end of life in a distinctly Jewish way. And what we find time and again is it doesn't matter if people are secular or they're religious or they're somewhere in between. So often when it comes to end of life, they want to do it in the way that is characteristically Jewish. And so the idea behind Rabbi Friedman's concept was to be able to offer spiritual care and social work care and guidance and navigation at the end of life, to be able to help people get their affairs in order, a la the story of Jacob and the Midrash, and really, really help guide people, get them the best care possible, and hold their hand. One of the things that we've taken pride in over the many years, and I joined Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy in the summer of 2014, is that we do everything we possibly can to be there to hold the hands of people in their final days and in their final hours, not only bringing them the best care possible, but very, very importantly, making certain that no Jew is ever alone. That end of life can be very lonely, can be very alienating and isolating, a time of vulnerability, and that what we seek to do is to help people at the end of life understand that their life mattered, to talk to them about their life and their legacy, and wherever possible to bring the family into that experience, as well as to heal any rifts that may have occurred. If there's a place for reconciliation, if there's a place to create a sense of forgiveness among family members where forgiveness is needed and necessary, as well as to help loved ones and the individual with the illness express their sense of gratitude as everyone is able to come together around a sense of unconditional love. Well, I know that all of us know what has happened over the last year. Many of us have suffered in numerous ways and endless ways. One of the things that really hurt us tremendously was, how do we fulfill the mission of no Jew is ever alone when we cannot be physically present with people who are taking their last breaths? And so we had been watching 1 year ago, we had been watching at the end of February, beginning of March, what was happening in China. We had been watching what was happening in Italy and how they were dealing with this soon-to-be pandemic, with this coronavirus, with this COVID-19. We all hoped, like many of you, I'm sure, that it would be like one of the other things that we had heard about, that it would sort of just burn out, or that it would disappear, or that it wouldn't make it to the States and it wouldn't be, as bad as it was. But of course, we were all mistaken and unfortunately not surprised. So what we did literally last year, the day after Purim, is as an agency, as an organization, we moved our entire office structure into our homes, like so many people did across the country and across the globe. But the thing that was so important to us was to make sure that people who had a terminal illness, people that needed us and relied on us, that they would continue to get care, which would look very different, because we were not able to be there to hold their hands, to sit at their bedside, let alone their own members of their family who were not able to be there at their bedside. And so one of the first things that we did was we committed ourselves, our social workers and our rabbis who do spiritual care, to calling on the phone every single one of our patients once or twice a week to check in with them to see what they needed. Now, the hospice care itself, the medical care, was able to continue, but everything else that wasn't specifically medical care could not happen in person. All of it had to happen at a distance. So we were, for a period of time, depending on where they were, we were with our full PPE, our personal protective equipment. We were going to people's windows when they were on the first floor, sometimes even on the second floor, where they would open their windows and it was still cold last March. We were trying to get FaceTime set up and Google Chat set up and ultimately Zoom set up. A year ago, Zoom was not a household name like it is today. And we were doing everything we possibly could, not only to hear the voices of our patients, but to also be able to see the faces of our patients. A lot of it was dependent on the caregivers. A lot of it was dependent on members of the family to be able to connect with people during this most difficult and challenging time. And so within the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, by the third week in March, we had this incredible infrastructure set up whereby we were seeing people on the computer or on their phones or on some kind of iPad or other device to be able to, because we wanted not only to hear their voices, but we wanted to see them. Part of what we pride ourselves on is being the eyes and ears, that we get so close to the people that we take care of that we notice when there is any kind of change and they need additional support or they need additional care. And of course, with the recognition that we were not able to go into facilities for virtue of bringing anything in, for us getting sick, for them getting sick, we literally reinvented our business model. One of the things that we were able to do very successfully, as soon as we set up spiritual care and social work care virtually, was to continue our life enrichment program. Our life enrichment program had grown to a really very wonderful place where we were bringing to people personally individual music visits. We had a series of musicians, cantors and other musicians who would go and play music either on the keyboard or on the guitar, one-on-one. Obviously, when we weren't with people, we couldn't do that. So we needed to reinvent that through the use of Zoom and other virtual experiences. We did the same thing with exercise, trying to get people to exercise within their homes. We hired 2 physical therapists to be able to do that. We had pet visits where we had a different dog or cat or tortoise or lizard or bearded dragon every week that we would Zoom into people's homes so that they could be connected to us, so we could see the smiles on their faces. And a lot of times that was something that helped them get through the day, to know that we were there, to know that they were not alone, to know that we were watching over them, and again, being able to see them, to know if there were any changes in their status. As things continued to get worse, we also recorded several prayers and put them on our website, our jewishhospice.org website. The healing prayer, the Mishaberach prayer, the prayer that we recite for the healing of body and the healing of soul. I actually had my son sing and play that on the piano, and I offered a commentary on that. We put it on our website and sent it out as widely as we possibly could. We also I recorded the end of life prayer, the Vidui. At the end of life, there is a prayer that we offer. It's not unlike the prayer we recite when we hit our chests on Yom Kippur and ask for forgiveness. At the end of life, we also recite a prayer, either an individual themselves if they're able, or a rabbi or family member on their behalf, which asks God to ultimately grant them peace and forgiveness so that they leave this world in purity. Normally, we go in to say these prayers. We were doing so many of these so quickly that we did as many as we could over FaceTime and Zoom. But because it was happening so much, so often, we recorded this prayer. I recorded this prayer on our website and let people know that if they wanted to play this, that would, that would suffice for being able to have recited the prayer on their behalf, asking God to protect them as they leave this world. In Jewish tradition, we believe that when we leave this world, it is our physical body that is laid to rest, but it is our soul, our neshama, that which is gives us our personality and everything that we're about, that returns to God, the source of all being. So we were pivoting like everybody else was pivoting. And probably where one of the other major pivots took place was in the funeral experience. Before I get to that, which I'll talk about in a second, we normally at Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy, we normally have a daily census of about 170 to 180 people that we follow. Not everybody is at the very end of their journey. Some people are on what we call supportive care. They've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, an illness that is life-limiting, but they're actually doing quite well and they don't need any medical interventions at this point. So we begin following people from the time of diagnosis, and they come in, a lot of people, as supportive care, where they're getting, if they want a rabbi or spiritual care, a lot of times they already have a rabbi, so they can have another rabbi, or they don't need to take our rabbi. They'll get social work care and any kind of navigation that they need, any kind of support from the Jewish community, from Jewish social services. We have a palliative care program. When somebody does need pain and symptom management, that's sort of the next level. And the final level is usually hospice care takes place when somebody has a diagnosis that the doctor anticipates that they've got 6 months or less. A lot of times people live longer, but usually hospice care will take effect. It's a Medicare benefit where Medicare pays for everything that goes into the care, including the supplies, including the nurses and the home health aides and everybody that comes to take care of the family, the medications. That is usually somewhere within the last 6 months of life. So between our supportive care program, our palliative care program, Life Links, and our hospice program, we normally have about 170 to 180 at a time. In the heat of COVID, in end of March, April into May, we went from 173 patients to almost 220 patients on any given day. Part of that increase was because people that had been diagnosed that might have been saying, I'm not ready for hospice yet, because if you're not psychologically ready, we still have services that we can provide, but we're never going to push anyone into hospice that doesn't want to be in hospice. But people did not want to go to the hospital. And so because the hospital was overflowing and in a lot of ways was seen as the seat of COVID because so many people were going to the hospital when they had COVID, the last thing many of our patients wanted to do was go to the hospital. They were afraid that if they went there, they would contract COVID. And so they came onto hospice. When you're on hospice, you don't call 911. When you have a crisis or an emergency, no matter what time of day or night, you call the hospice and they are available to you 24/7. So we were handling people's crises around the clock at home and keeping them out of the hospital. And so that's when our numbers really went high and stayed high for many months. From March 11th to the end of June of last year, we had 153 patients that we knew for sure had COVID, and unfortunately, 51 of them passed away. Thankfully, many of them recovered, but they all did not recover. Many of them had passed. 51 of them had passed because of COVID. Because we're involved with families, especially when somebody is unaffiliated, a lot of times we get involved in the funeral experience as well. So let me shift now to talk about how funerals and just sort of the entire experience after death changed, and it did. It changed significantly. And I don't think there was anybody in our community or anyone anywhere that wasn't touched by it in some way. It was certainly the most sad, most difficult time in my career, and I know my colleagues all felt the same way. And I remember our weekly meetings at Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy. It was a different rabbi's turn to cry, or that's how it felt every week, because what we were seeing was hurting us so personally and so profoundly that we were literally lifting one another up week after week. Literally, we're talking about what we had seen, and sadness and the horror of it all. And we were really trying to help each other get through just an unimaginable time. Let me talk to the experience of death. And people were, as much as we did our best to try to be with people, people were dying alone. A lot of, at the very beginning and for the first foreseeable months, for first few months, family members were not allowed in, and every facility made their own call. Sometimes if somebody was on hospice or if they were actively dying, they would let one family member in, depending on the facility. In many situations, that was not allowed. That was not something that was able to happen. And so people, as much as we were trying to get in there or to have family members get in there or to advocate on their behalf, people were dying alone, and that was devastating. I mean, just devastating. We did our very, very best to support members of the family. We did our very, very best to offer counseling and bereavement, to be able to reach out to them and bring them as much strength as we could. And a lot of times family members were not coming into town for the death of a parent or a sibling, because it just wasn't safe to fly, and they didn't feel that they could come into town. So I can't tell you, and I speak not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of my colleagues and wonderful colleagues throughout the metro region. We were officiating at funerals where it was the rabbi, it was the funeral director, and the cemetery workers, and that was it. Many of the cemeteries in town, many of the cemeteries were closed, doors were locked, and we were literally, it was the most unbelievable experience where I would offer a eulogy into a camera, knowing that people were watching it, that there was a live feed of it and people were watching, but that it was almost like watching it on television. Again, surreal experience, and that the pain that they felt that they couldn't be there for the death of their parents, and they couldn't be at the funeral. It was just unbelievable. It was an unbelievable time. Some of the cemeteries, as time went on, had other rules. Some opened up to 10 and then literally closed the gates of the cemetery. I remember witnessing in one funeral that I performed last summer, there was an 11th person, a woman who was trying to climb the gates of the cemetery to get in. And she had been told in advance that they were only allowing 10, and that everybody needed to stay in their cars, and that they would hear the service from a microphone. And I mean, just again, things you would never even imagine happening in 2020 in the modern advanced world. It was really unbelievable. People needing to wear masks and gloves and everything to be able to protect themselves and be able to protect others. We work so hard in Judaism to connect people to one another, right? For hugs and kisses and connection. And so it was unnatural not to offer sympathy to someone by giving them a hug or by holding their hand. Just the thought of like, I can't touch you and you can't touch me. And the thing you need most importantly right now, more than anything, is you need a hug, and you can't have it. You can't get it. That was just unbelievable and just horrible, in every way. Over the course of time, funeral homes. So really to this day, most funeral homes are still not open. I mean, there are some of our funeral homes will allow like a group of 10 or a group of 20 maximum spread out, but by and large, still 95% of our funerals locally are happening graveside. And I will tell you, over the course of, thankfully we didn't have a terrible winter, but there were some days in December and January and February that were bitter, bitter cold. And we'd be out there and we need to tell ourselves, listen, we need to forget about how cold we are, because we're blessed to be able to bring comfort to this family. They just lost their loved one and COVID is raging, and we need to make it through, because we have to bring the comfort and the peace and tell the story of the person's legacy. But it was very cold and very challenging on several days throughout the winter. Let me tell you a little bit about the pivot that the funeral homes were doing. At one point, we didn't really understand. We understand it better now, although I know there's still some questions here and there, but the contagion that COVID provided, like, can you get COVID from a person who passed away? Is that possible, right? And so what the funeral homes were doing, and certainly very respectfully, I mean, we have a beautiful tradition in Judaism. When somebody dies, everything that we do between the death and the burial is in what we call the mitzvah of Kavod Hamate, the mitzvah of taking care of the dead body. Everything that we do goes into making sure that we take care of that body. In Judaism, we have a group called a Chevra Kadisha. Each of our funeral homes in town, all great funeral homes that we have we're very lucky in this town to have such great Jewish funeral homes. They take this responsibility, this mitzvah, very, very seriously, of doing tahara, of washing the body, that women will wash women, men will wash men, and only uncover the part of the body that they're washing for purity. When COVID hit, the big question came up is, can we wash these bodies? Because what if even if we're wearing gloves and if we're wearing masks, we don't know if the body is contagious, and can we do this in the same way? That's one thing. And then we dress the body in tachrichin. We dress the body in a burial shroud. Can we manipulate the body in order to be able to dress the body? I mean, do we want to touch the body even though, right, we are wearing protective equipment? And I will tell you, at the very, very beginning of COVID, and for a period of many, many weeks, until we really got some more understanding, even though the ball was moving quickly and things were changing quickly, right? First, we weren't wearing masks, then we were wearing masks. So you all know this was something that continued to evolve. Many of the funeral homes were actually sanitizing the bodies. They were actually closing all of the holes into the inside of the body with cotton, again, in a very gentle and a very respectful way, but making sure that no bodily fluids would be able to come out of the body, so that the people that were involved in preparing the body for burial would not come into contact with any bodily fluids. They did this thoughtfully, they did this carefully, they did this respectfully. A lot of times they would take the tachrichin, they would take the burial shroud and not dress the body in it, but place the burial shroud very carefully and respectfully on top of the body. So these are pivots. These are things that needed to do, because on one hand, we wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of Kavod Hamate, of honoring the dead. But the other mitzvah, the other sort of competing mitzvah, is in Jewish tradition, we have this concept of chaye bahem, that we have to live by the mitzvot, not die by them. So if there's anything that would put us into jeopardy in any way, then we actually set that mitzvah aside in order to protect the lives of the living. So we were really, in everything we did, from patient care to connecting with members of the family, to the preparation of the body and the burial itself. We tried to find a balance to the best of our ability to continue to honor Jewish tradition, to continue to honor the life that had been lived, but also to protect all of the people that were involved in the process of preparing the body for burial. Of course, so often during this difficult period of time, we really relied on virtual vessels like Zoom, like we are on right now, to be able to connect. So almost every one of the funeral intakes that I did with members of the family happened on Zoom. And I remember I taught many people how to use Zoom, that before I would meet with them. And again, I speak for not just myself, but my colleagues. Everyone could tell their story of what this was like, but teaching members of the family how to use Zoom, how to click, how to mute, how to unmute. But we were doing these intakes. And to this day, most of rabbis in town, most rabbis around the country, are still meeting with families via Zoom. Now, it's always important to try and find a silver lining, right? There's a lot of doom and gloom, of course, because it's been such a difficult time. But I will tell you, one of the the benefits, and there's not a lot of benefits, but one of the silver linings I would say is I connected with members of people's families like I may not have done before, that they were much more involved in the process of care, that there were, when we would bring music or pet visits or gentle exercise, members of the family from Los Angeles and Chicago and New York and St. Louis and Houston, around the country, Singapore, they would actually come on the Zoom and see their loved one and feel connected that way. So that we really use technology, like many people are using technology, to try and benefit from the opportunity to connect people, connect members of the family with one another. When it came to family intakes and preparation for the funeral, again, people were able to connect with all over. I cannot tell you, I don't want to over exaggerate, but multiple members, let me say it this way, multiple families reconnected with one another that hadn't talked to each other in years. That when I would do a Zoom Shiva, and I did many of those Zoom Shivas, and probably everybody here has been on multiple Zoom Shivas over the last year. There was one Zoom Shiva in particular, I remember, that the family stayed on Zoom after the service was over with one another for an hour and a half, catching up with one another. This family had not seen each other in 15 years or really, really talked to one another. So there are like moments like that that I think about and say, that was a meaningful experience for them, and it may not have happened if they weren't able to connect on Zoom. I was involved in several funerals where a husband and wife died within hours of each other. I remember one where the woman was Jewish and the husband, or the wife was Jewish and the husband was Catholic. I went out to Dearborn and did a funeral where the Catholic priest officiated first and I officiated right after. They had died within 4 hours of each other, and they would not let us come near the burial site until after they had completely lowered the casket and covered the earth. And then everybody had to spread out, 6 feet apart unless they lived in the same homes. So we found a way to honor Jewish tradition. We found a way to continue to honor the life and the legacy of people who passed away. But it was a very, very challenging, difficult, and truly horrible time. Some people, when it got warmer, were having drive-by shivas. Even before it got warmer, were having people sort of drive through and offer their condolences. And some people in the summer were having backyard social distancing gatherings or shivas, because relationships in our tradition mean everything, and connecting with one another means everything. It's who we are. And the fact that we couldn't do that was just something that was beyond our wildest imagination. There's certainly more to say, but I do want to actually pause for a moment. I want to bring Joyce Weingarten on for a few moments. Joyce has stepped forward and offered to share a beautiful, beautiful reflection that she wrote. Unfortunately, Joyce lost her absolutely dear, sweet father during COVID, and I had spent some time at the beginning of the pandemic talking to Joyce, and she was connected through her synagogue at Dat Shalom and the amazing clergy there who supported her. This was a very, very challenging time. And just as one example of Joyce sort of taking the opportunity to reflect on what this time period was, I'd love for Joyce, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and sharing the beautiful reflection that you wrote about your amazing dad.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you all see me? I'm seeing like.
We can't see you. We can see water.
How come you can't see me?
Can you start your video maybe?
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Okay. There you go. Okay. Please share, Joyce, if you wouldn't mind.
No, I want to thank you, Rabbi Krakoff, and the Jewish Historical Society for allowing me to be part of your presentation this evening. As Rabbi Krakoff said, my beloved father passed away from COVID early on in the process in April, and as I was ending my experience saying Kaddish for him, I had many thoughts that I wanted to write down that I hoped would capture what was going on then, as Rabbi Krakoff just did, and hopefully help other people as well that are dealing with the same situation. I've shared these thoughts with my minion at Adat Shalom, and it's my honor to share them with you this evening. So I called my writing Kaddish during COVID. My beloved father's passing from COVID on April 24th, 2020, during the stay-at-home order was a nightmare. It would have been a nightmare whenever he passed, but these circumstances certainly made it worse. My heart is broken. Will it ever heal? I can't stop crying. 10 people allowed at the cemetery, all in masks and social distance. 10 people that do not include my children or siblings. They live out of town and it is too dangerous to travel during COVID. They are watching the funeral on live stream, as is everyone else. It is surreal. I can't stop crying. I am grateful for my husband who is by my side, my niece, my cousins, and my wonderful clergy. On the way home from the cemetery, my husband says, "That was crazy." "The funeral," I ask, "or did you see something on the road just now?" "The funeral," he says. Brunch is waiting on our porch from friends when we return, and we begin a week of Shiva, just the two of us and our dog. We have virtual Shiva visits via FaceTime and phone calls, and I'm grateful. Dinner is delivered every day by family and friends. I don't believe I have ever felt so grateful for food in my life. The morning after the funeral, I click on the link to Adat Shalom's Zoom minion. And there you all are, my beloved minion family. There you all are in your Zoom windows, offering me words of condolence. There you all are, just as you were for me and my father in our synagogue chapel when my beloved mother passed. There you all are, and we begin again. 11 months, less one day. The only thing missing for me is your hugs. I turn my kitchen into shul twice a day to say Kaddish with my minion family, and soon it becomes a new normal. We are able to be together virtually to daven and to allow mourners to say Kaddish. I am so grateful to be part of this community. I need to be part of this community. My reasons for saying Kaddish now are the same as they were when I said Kaddish for my mother. It is my responsibility as a child. It gives honor and memory to my father's name, and it is part of my own personal therapy. And when the heart slowly, slowly begins to heal, it allows you to be a light to other people as well. And I hold these reasons to still be true, even on Zoom. There will be a time when we can gather in person again. Until then, our community will continue to meet like this every day, twice a day, and we will continue to support each other during these challenging times.
Joyce, I want to thank you for that, and having gone through part of this journey with you. And I just want to say, and then I would love to take some questions. We are so blessed to have such an amazing, amazing Jewish community in Metro Detroit. I will tell you, individual synagogues and temples and just people and unbelievable clergy who are all really supporting one another to be able to support members of our community. I feel so blessed to be a rabbi in this town and to be able to, go through something so horrible and unimaginable together with people that just care so deeply and want to connect with each other. So Joyce, thank you for that. And if there are questions now, if anyone has a question before we conclude, I would certainly be happy to take any questions that you have.
Again, please submit your questions via the chat, and I'm happy to moderate those for everyone. We have one question. Are there different end-of-life needs for Holocaust survivors?
Yes, a lot of times that is the case. Great question. One of the things that we are very careful and thoughtful about, in particular, when it comes to a Holocaust survivor, is we don't want to do anything that would bring back memories for them of being in the camps. We are exceptionally exceptionally thoughtful and sensitive to all kinds of things. If they're in a facility, we're careful about making sure that the shower doesn't feel like they're being taken to the showers. Certainly when it comes to food and drink, we always want to do what is safe and what is comfortable. Usually in a hospice experience, there isn't necessarily hydration or food that we just sort of, we manage any kind of infections, we manage the care, we manage pain, but we wouldn't necessarily bring hydration or any kind of food. When it's a Holocaust survivor, and in fact, there's several that we're working with right now, if they want to have a feeding tube, if they want to have hydration, we do everything we can to work with our hospices, and we have hospice partners who would allow that because of the experience of the Holocaust and wanting to be sensitive to not bringing back any horrific memories for them of what it was like.
We have one comment that the synagogue has, this viewer's synagogue has hosted a Zoom Shiva Minyan several times, and it has been an amazingly supportive experience for the families. And another question that came through: thank you for what you do for hospice as well. Can you speak about people with Alzheimer's and end-of-life care?
Absolutely. So we have determined that approximately 65% of the people that we take care of have some form of dementia. We're actually training our rabbis. In fact, we have a program tomorrow for members of our community talking about dementia care and talking about how can we help people in particular that have some form of dementia. One of the things that has been wildly successful with individuals who have dementia is to bring them music, because it's another part of the brain. And I remember my first experience of this many years ago was with a man. When I would go visit him for spiritual care, he said one or two words to me. By chance, I brought him a guitarist who played Beatles music, and he started singing Beatles songs like you wouldn't believe. So we're very, very sensitive to the different stages of dementia and how dementia progresses. And we try to meet every single individual where they're at, not only religiously, but certainly where the progression of disease is as well. And we try to bring them as many resources as we possibly can.
So I actually had a unique situation myself in COVID. My uncle unfortunately passed away of a heart attack at the very beginning of April last year. And he passed away in Nevada, I'm sorry, and wanted to be buried in Wisconsin. And the way that they solved this problem was that he was cremated, and some of his ashes stayed with his wife, who's not Jewish, and some of them were buried. Did you encounter any other situations like this? I know cremation is not a tradition in Judaism. And how did you deal with people having to cope with different circumstances like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I actually had personally come across several of those experiences where they would not have normally picked cremation, but that was the only way that they were going to be able to bury their loved one in a way. And so one of the things that we talked about was burying, instead of spreading the cremains, holding on to the cremains and then burying them where they wanted to bury them at the appropriate time. I mean, there were all kinds of complications, and every sort of state kind of had their rules and regulations and what was accepted and what wasn't. But yeah, actually that came up more. I mean, cremation certainly comes up from time to time. And as people, we don't tell people what to do. We give them advice. And if they're asking, well, what does Jewish law say? We'll say, well, it's discouraged, but nonetheless, if you're going to cremate, it is certainly better to bury those cremains if you can. And that came up more often actually as a question during the period during the sort of the intensity of COVID.
If there are any other questions, please submit them via the chat feature. And again, I'm happy to moderate the discussion.
While we're waiting for another question, I would just add one sort of interesting statistic. It's interesting that the statistics show that 86% of Americans say they want to die at home, or whatever they call home, surrounded by family and friends. And the reality is that in actuality, it's only 24% of Americans that are older than 65 that die at home or what they call home. So 86% say they want to, And at the end of the day, 24% actually do. And one of the amazing things that hospice care helps make happen is honoring people's wishes when they do wish to die at home, to be able to die at home. You know, hospitals will only keep you as a general inpatient on the hospice floor if you are going to die within a period of just a few days. Otherwise, and most people don't want to die attached to machines. They want to die in familiar surroundings. And so one of the benefits of hospice care is doing everything that we can to get people home and into familiar surroundings, to be able to help them take their last breath and spend their last days among loved ones. And I pray that as people are now getting their vaccines and as the world begins to go back to what it used to be like, that we can return to a sense of normal, although I think it's a new normal now because COVID will always be in the world. But I pray, please God, that we never, ever again experience the challenges that we did over the last year.
Another question that came through is the facts were changing so quickly, especially at the beginning of COVID. Everything seemed different every single day. How were you able to keep your practices and what you do up to date with all the constant changing information?
Yeah, I mean, it changed so quickly. I mean, the gathering could be this number, then it could be this number, then it could be this number. Funerals could have this and this, and you could, you know, some facilities allowed you in for if someone was on hospice and some didn't. And if it seemed like somebody was actively dying, and I mean, our heads were spinning. The truth of the matter is we did the best we could and our heads were spinning. We always tried to understand what the state mandates were and to try to get the most up-to-date information. But there were times when that changed from 1 hour to the next. What we did by and large is we would reach out to our hospice partners. Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy, we sort of bring the entire experience together. People make one call to us and we coordinate everything, but we don't actually do the medical care. The medical care is done by our partners. And so they had somebody at each of the hospices that had their finger on the pulse. And there were many times we called our hospice partners and said, okay, what is the policy right now? What do we need to do in this hour? And that's what we went with. And that was very, very challenging.
This viewer said the Jewish News article was very nice, and thank you for what you do. And they also wanted to know what challenges you see for the future.
As a agency, Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy, is that okay? Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think that our challenges are that we are, you know, we are a not-for-profit organization. We do not charge people for our services. Nobody ever gets a bill for what we do. We don't want people to say, well, you know, the rabbi was here for 45 minutes, so that's worth this amount, or the social worker was here for this amount. We don't want people to worry about that. We want to be in the steering. We want to be in the driver's seat to help people with their care, and want like family members to be family members and let us do the heavy lifting. The challenge is always, how do we mine the goodwill? How are we able to sort of pay for our services? You know, and we don't want to ask somebody for money while we're taking care of their loved one. So it's the follow-up after the fact, because we are based on the philanthropy of our community, and our community is extremely philanthropic. I don't know if our agency would be as successful in other cities. We are so blessed by the philanthropy of the Jewish community. So that's one challenge. And another challenge is our spiritual care team is getting older, and we now are looking to the next generation. And seminaries are raising rabbis to be pulpit rabbis, and just now understanding that the pulpit is not the only place where a rabbi is needed, that rabbis are needed for pastoral care and end-of-life care, as we certainly have an aging community, and many communities around the country are aging. We need to bring in a younger clergy team to be able to take care of the next generation of people.
Another attendee wondered, what is the policy now for funerals regarding the numbers, different, you know, practices? Right.
So it's interesting you say that, because I was at the cemetery yesterday, and there were a lot more people than I had anticipated. The cemetery thought the number was 25. there were certainly more than 25. I think that the cemeteries don't want to police this, that we have a statement from the Michigan Board of Rabbis that is around the number. I don't remember if the latest number is 25 or 35 or what it is. I don't remember exactly where we're at right now, but I think it's a difficult time because on one hand, people are feeling freer. People are feeling that, a little bit more liberated because they're getting the vaccine. We also know that we can't throw off our masks and go back to the way it used to be. And so I think the numbers are really somewhere between 25 and 50. I think if it's inside, I think the number is also 25, but the funeral homes have people sort of sitting in pods, people that are in the same household, they sit together, but otherwise they spread out. And I think this is a ball that's going to continue to evolve in the coming weeks and months.
Is there a role for lay people to participate in hospice care?
Yes. So in the best case scenario, and I keep thinking of the post-COVID world, we actually have a really vibrant volunteer program. Right now, we've sort of pulled back on volunteers because we're not having people go into people's homes for obvious reasons. But I think in the not too distant future, as we all emerge and we're all feeling a little bit better, we will love to have volunteers that we train in coordination with Jewish Family Service that actually go into people's homes and sit with them and talk with them. And those relationships that develop through the volunteer program are relationships that are very, very special and very meaningful. And I only, again, hope and pray that once again, very, very soon, we'll have a dynamic volunteer program.
Are there any other questions before we close tonight's program? Well, I don't see any questions coming through on any of our chat features. So thank you again, Rabbi. We really, really appreciate you being here with us tonight. It was such an insightful program about the changes that are going on and what it means for end-of-life care and just end-of-life care in general and what that means and how important what you do is. And we are very grateful that you were able to join us. Thank you so much. Oh, we did have one more question come through. Oh, they just wanted to say great program.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing all of you again very soon on one of our upcoming programs. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.